Hi,
Uh, Hi. Can you hear me?
can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Hmm.
Oh, can you hear me? You can?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just putting some discussion questions up in the chat. I wonder if I can cut and paste all of these for later. Oh. Did you go to the main conversation?
No, I didn't because I couldn't. But
Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know if that's you or me. I was having trouble with my audio a little while ago.
I
Hold on.
see. Well, for me it says that I'm sharing audio. So,
Let me see what my audio setting is. Hold on. I might have to leave and come back. If I leave and come back, I'll be right back. Let's see. Minnie, can you talk?
yeah, can you hear me now?
I still can't hear anybody.
Well, Leila's joining,
Welcome
so
to the
hopefully
microphone.
when she joins that if you can hear her. Um,
Excellent, I can hear you now. This is wonderful.
oh, you can?
Ah,
If you're talking, I can't hear you.
oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, yay. Okay. I'm hoping that more people will come in here after they finish up the conversation in the other room.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It's the holdup.
Yeah. I don't know why my audio is so messed up. Is your name Rukmini?
Rukmini.
Rukmini? And
Hmm.
then I see Layla? Is that right? Also, what's
Could
cool
you
are you?
hear? Sorry, could you hear Lila?
No, I couldn't hear her. Could you?
Okay. No. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Too many audio problems. What school are you from?
We're both at Emory.
You're both at Emory. Okay. So I put a bunch of questions in the chat when I left. They didn't all go away, did they? They did, apparently. Let me put them back in. Let's see if I can control copy. There we go. And if anybody has any other things that they want to just sort of add to potential things that we could talk about, I want to make sure that we're not just saying the same things that we have been saying for the past hour, but that we sort of get into some of the specifics of it and maybe try and come up with some practical applications at this point. More people are coming. Okay. Okay. So I see Emma, and I see, oh, there are about 15 people here. Hi, everybody. So I'm Brandy Blake, and I am moderating this session, and Rukmini here has helped me get my audio working and been very patient with me while I was trying to do that, so thank you. So we are discussing racial justice and the WC. It can be a continuation of the conversation that we were just having, but I have put in the chat some other potential questions to try and delve into a variety of different aspects of what we've been talking about. So we spent a lot of time in the session talking about standard American English and things like that, and that is an absolutely valuable discussion, but I don't want us to reinvent the wheel and talk about the same things we were just talking about. So if you guys want, and feel free to ask other questions. These were just some sample questions that I added over in the chat. But feel free to continue conversations that we have been having, but let's try and see if we can come up with some suggestions and some ideas, and not just keep it theoretical, but if we can be more active about what we are doing or what we would like to do or what ideas we have, I think that would be great. So does anybody have a question or have a start off point or want to start with one of these other things? And I'm sorry if you guys hear my kids or anything in the background. I'll do my best. John, if you want to go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, so like you were saying, I appreciated the conversation about standard American English, but what I'm more curious about is like how we can position centers as like centers who have as the core part of their mission anti-racism work and work against oppression. And in particular, from what I'm seeing, it seems like a lot of the conversations we have here involve terminology and language and ideas that I just haven't seen in other parts of the university where I'm at. And so it seems like bringing these ideas to other spaces that are not sort of center-centric, associated, or adjacent would be really helpful. And I'm curious to know, like in your experience, and particularly in the experience of undergrads who are here, what are some ways that we might be able to do that effectively beyond just the normal work of training people who work in the Writing Center, introducing ideas to people who come to the Writing Center, and then engaging faculty in sort of in traditional fields, because it seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we've already talked about, but maybe there's important work to be done. I feel like there's a lot of important work to be done elsewhere, and I'm curious to know what your ideas are and what undergraduates see as opportunities for that.
Logan?
Yeah, hello? Can you,
We can hear you.
I think that the question that John posed was a really great question. And I know at my university, we do a lot of class visits to sort of introduce the Writing Center to undergraduate students. And I'm not sure how standard of practice this is um, in other writing centers, but it occurred to me, especially with the discussion of terminology and language usage, perhaps somehow coding some of that into either I don't like saying promotional materials because I don't like marketing, but into some of our materials that we hand out, or some other sort of information there, or even things like those class visits where we might be able to express some of that as we go through, as we do those kinds of presentations. Yeah, student outreach, I think, would be.
Brittany, did you have a response?
Yeah, it was basically going off of what was just said. It's about student outreach, of course. Then there is class visitations, and I believe, just my experience, that the associate directors, the directors themselves, when they have conversations with other faculty members, they have to also buy into and promote and discuss these topics with other faculty members, directors, admins, things of that nature, in order to get everyone talking about it. Because if it's just happening in the studio or in the center, while it's nice to have that space, it doesn't do anything. It's not as generative as we would like it to be. So having things such as student outreach programs, or, I mean, granted, those also require financing or a means of growth, I guess, like either through financing or just a lot of determination. And of course, there's not a whole lot of either, especially right now. So I would like to also figure out how can we take these conversations outside the Writing Center in a way that is generative, but also doesn't require more labor on behalf of either people of color who are tutors, or that kind of, I guess, requires more work from those who are in positions of power.
And I would add to what Brittany says is that when we have momentum like we have right now, with everything crappy going on in the world, we can not force those conversations more, but a lot of the universities are having bigger conversations about this, and now is the time when we need to be jumping into those conversations. Emma?
Hello, can everyone see and hear me? Hi. I'm Emma. I'm an assistant director and a PhD student over at UGA, and I completely agree that this is prime time for writing centers to make noise beyond the one-on-one consultation. In response to John's question and building off of Val's comment in the chat here, I think that reaching out and collaborating with divisions and offices on campus could be a really fruitful avenue for advocating for multilingual writers and students outside of the sort of traditional walls of the Writing Center. At UGA, we are building collaborative relationships with the Center for Teaching and Learning and some other sort of well-resourced divisions, like divisions that focus on professionalization in addition to student excellence and academic achievement. We also tried to do this through social media last year. And, Logan, I know you said you were ambivalent about marketing, and I share that ambivalence, and that extends and is even amplified when it comes to social media. However, it is an opportunity to avail ourselves of, branding in order to make clear where we stand on this issue, and what we believe to be our priorities when it comes to composition and writing instruction across and within disciplines. Those resources that we developed and disseminated over social media were instructor facing, because I think as we're all sort of agreeing more or less, it's about time for interventions at the level of instruction within our universities. Because those one-on-one interactions with student writers are require a different balance of priority and a different method of navigating prerogative. And remaining student-centered needs to remain kind of at the core of that one-on-one consultation practice. So I'm interested in hearing what other types of interventions folks are developing or have in the works to intercede and to advocate for multilingual writers at the university level.
Yes, and if there are any very specific things that you guys have done, either events that you have had, there's people talking about partnerships, like Val was talking about partnerships with the Office of Diversity and different student groups. How do we partner with them? What kind of events have people done with them, or other partnerships have people developed with them that have been active? How can we how have people worked with faculty specifically? Do you guys have any suggestions or ideas or successes that we can share with each other that we can build off of? I will mention that at our center, when it comes to multilingual writers, we had, for example, we did a really big push to hire multilingual writers and sent emails out to all of the different language-oriented student groups, because and country-oriented student groups, and saying we're recruiting consultants. We would really like to have people who have a multilingual background, because we are going to try to create this what we call a multilingual block, where we have, in this block of time, we have all tutors on hand who have a multilingual background. We're going to do workshops for multilingual tutors or students during this time block. We are going to focus that time on them, and then a lot of the conversation that we put into it is not, we didn't want students to think that if we have a consultant who has a background in the Chinese language, that a Chinese student could come and speak with that student in Chinese. That wasn't the goal. The goal was, we have multilingual students who experience having to switch languages back and forth all the time, and know how exhausting that is, and how problematic that can be, and how difficult it is to deal with faculty. And they can be there to discuss those issues with the students in regards to the work that they bring in. And that has been relatively successful at our school. I'm at Georgia Tech. We have a lot of multilingual students at Georgia Tech. And so that's one thing that we have done in an additional attempt to just increase diversity in hiring, right? Because the students are more likely to come in if there are consultants there who look like them. They're more likely to feel comfortable in that environment. So as much diversity as we can get in hiring, the better. So that's one of the, so what other things have you guys done? When I say you guys, I mean everybody here. Emma?
Yeah, I will. I will say that this is sort of a new initiative for our writing center. We've been working on this for really only the past year and a half or 2 years. But I will say that we get a lot of requests for workshops, and a lot of those workshops are asking for Writing Center people to come in and give a little primer on academic writing. And that's a really great opportunity to advocate for thinking beyond SAE. And it's something that you can do with the faculty member in the room, and that taking a more scholarly approach to some of that presentation can be a way to advocate for and to inaugurate this sort of hopefully a cultural shift across campus. The more people we get sort of familiar with this terminology and also convinced by an overview of the scholarship within it, even just like one or two slides, just to sort of convince the more scholarly oriented folks in our audience that this is in fact happening, has been met with some pretty positive feedback here at UGA. So I'm excited to hear about other people's experience too.
Other thoughts or ideas or just questions that you want to throw out there to the group? And we are sort of back in a conversation about multilingualism, and that's a great and valid conversation, but we also do need to make sure that we're talking about anti-Blackness too, and anti-racism, and how anti-Blackness appears at our school and how we can fight against that. Val, yes. Val?
Oh, sorry. It takes a minute for this. So, when I was talking about in my comment about the Black students at Emory, they've made like kind of like a list of demands and kind of like for reparation's sake, and also just to like, start fixing the system of the PWI, which is a lot to undertake. So they did a really good job, I think, with their list. And I think it's worth like looking at and mentioning. It all came from kind of like this Instagram account called like Being Black at Emory, and it's anonymously sharing stories about Black students at Emory or Black staff of faculty, reaching beyond that. And I think that it's just worth looking at, worth reading, and worth like getting uncomfortable and thinking, wow, like we can do better than this, and we should be doing better than this. And so it might be something like the actual list, and it's also kind of like a petition because it's a letter of it, and then they're asking people to sign it either individually or by an organization. So I was thinking, like maybe as a center, we would want to partake in like actually co-signing this and saying, hey, we are also advocating for this, and we're going to take the time and do the research and read about it, and try to infiltrate that in all of our systems, I don't know what the right word is, but so I don't know if something similar. I know a lot of things have been happening this summer, and we want to move beyond this summer. So I would suggest that everyone reach out to whatever respective center they have and listen to the undergraduate students there.
John.
Sorry, it just takes a second to click through the little boxes to actually put video and audio on. Shout out to Val. I think you're awesome. That's like such a good point. And then in the chat, Alex Dresner was mentioning like addressing this question of just the Writing Center itself and whether that's a place that is comfortable to students of color and multilingual students. I know we're talking about these different interventions and things Writing Centers can do, but I can say, so I'm at Emory, and one of the things that struck me when I first joined up with the Writing Center was that like the leadership is exclusively white, and I understand that like funding can be an issue and maybe there's only so many spots. But at least from my perspective, I think if there's not a person of color in the actual leadership, that really sends a message to tutors who may want to apply, who are people of color, and like me, or and it sets the culture of the space as being maybe culturally white. And then I think it's easy to slip into this language of, well, if the leaders are all, if the administrators are all white or the leaders are all white, then they may slip into this language of, well, here's us, meaning white people, and then we want to work with them, meaning people of color or people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and so on. And I mean, I know this is like maybe not the most comfortable topic or maybe not the easiest thing to intervene on, but it seems to me like maybe this is the first intervention if writing centers are really going to lead in anti-racism work at predominantly and historically white institutions.
Mm-hmm. Lee? Lee, do you want to jump on?
Yep, sorry, I was just clicking on my buttons.
Cool.
I don't have a response directly for John. I just kind of wanted to ask a different version of it as someone who is also part of white leadership at Emory. I'm at Oxford College. I just kind of wanted to raise something else that's been on my mind, and I don't mean to distract from John's question. I just have like another facet of it that I've been thinking about, and just wanted to acknowledge that, like, yeah, when we talk about anti-racism in the Writing Center, it seems so often that we imagine predominantly white institutions, but also predominantly white Writing Center staff and leadership. But that many of us are really fortunate to have a staff that's diverse racially and other ways. And so I've just been thinking about like how the dynamics and the stakes of tutor training and also the way that tutors work with writers change when we acknowledge that reality. So especially when, like, I, a white person, am in charge of leading that training. So I don't mean to like focus this on me, but I'm just wanting to think about like what are some ways that we can incorporate anti-racist approaches that acknowledge that staff have different levels of experience and comfort with talking about race and energy for talking about race, and more importantly, like that doing this work impacts our staff of color differently. So I didn't mean to like pull that toward me, but I just thought that that was like also kind of like a flip side of what John was asking.
Well, and to add on to that, additional additional discomfort can come not just from it being a predominantly white institution, but just we're Georgia people. Some of us are in a little bit more open-minded areas of the state, and others have administrations that are a lot more conservative and tightly bound and less open-minded about the conversations that we're having and all of that. So we initially have these difficulties with hiring and with whether it's hiring for administration in a writing center or hiring a multicultural staff in some way, or a multilingual staff or a multiracial staff, and that can be complicated by the overall university and the university administration. So what can we do to overcome some of those roadblocks and to increase this comfort level with our centers and our administration and our ability to talk about these things and act? Rukmini?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say maybe one thing that could be helpful about that is thinking about like white, like writing center tutors, white staff, for their conversations about race to be with other white people as a way of trying to shift the burden from people of color in the writing center to white people having to actively engage with their own anti-racist work and their own privileges. So I think that that's something that like is difficult to navigate, but because especially when you have like all white leadership, because then it becomes this like in conversation between people who are in power and people who are white and therefore in power. But I think that when it comes to like having these sort of like meta discussions about like how does like the way that we talk impact, you know, people who speak different languages or different dialects from us, that those conversations need to be had by white people and with white people, because to be a person of color in that space and have people talking about you as if like you exist on a piece of paper, like that's not quite comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Something I want to mention.
Yeah, and this is something that white people need to be accountable and need to be actively working on these issues with other white people who have that sort of power, right? Brittany?
And also, just to tack on to that, if we as white groups and people who are in power seek out people of color to lead these discussions, those must be compensated at all times, because that was a common complaint that I have heard from people of color who actually do those workshops, like anti-racism workshops, and they speak to usually room full of people who are white wanting to learn more about being woke or something, and it's usually disheartening, and they sometimes are not compensated, and that's not okay, and like the entire situation's not okay. But I also, while I know at least my leadership, we're willing to have the discussion. Nicole and I have no problems being uncomfortable. It is, how can we make sure it's not performative? Because the white leadership that I have noticed that previous from us, it has been very performative and inner disgust and not reflective in any way. And how can we make sure that we are being generative and not, I don't know, just talking at each other and not doing something with it?
And some of this comes from what Una and Val were discussing in the chat, right? The whiteness, standard American English, all of that is being rewarded because of that's the way the system works, right? We can all admit that the university system, when it comes to systematic oppression, is right on up there with having been oppressing Black and Indigenous and people of color for centuries now, sort of built on this system. And I remember, I remember when a couple of years ago, when 2016 happened and Trump was elected president, and the people were all disgruntled and upset, and it was like the forestry service or something like that that made like one of the initial big stands, and everybody was like, I hadn't expected in my apocalyptic idea of what the future was look like that the forestry people, the National Wildlife Service, was going to be the one that led the rebellion, right? So I want it to be the writing center people that are overturning the university system, right? Wouldn't that be, nobody would expect that. Wouldn't that be brilliant if it was the writing center people who were making the active anti-racist plays? So what can we do? I mean, if you think about how anti-Blackness shows up in your university, we've talked about standard American English, right? We've talked about hiring. Are there any other ways that you guys see it? Lack of compensation, as Brittany has put it, for emotional work, right? What else are the places where we can actively work to overcome? Logan?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm myself because I went to school on a campus that was very much involved with its own history, and so and history of that, of course, is built upon the oppressions of numerous different peoples of different backgrounds. And I'm wondering if perhaps in terms of like, or at least acknowledging or maybe putting that forward in certain spaces, because we have a lot of imagery associated with that, like the emblem for my university is like a bell tower that was like used on like a Civil War era fort, which is uh, not good at all. And then there is also like the seal of the university is also coated with lots of bringing the light of civilization to like other people kind of language. So I'm wondering if maybe
Mhm.
investing or making sure that that kind of thing is more aware and maybe more critically assessed and put out there is another part of like bringing up these issues to the surface.
Absolutely. And I would add to that that on our campuses there are often going to be a lot of student groups that are actively doing this work, right?
Mhm.
There are going to be student groups who are actively fighting against, let's change the name of this building. Let's be aware of this history on campus. I know that happened at Clemson very recently. And I think those discussions have happened at UGA and some other places too around the state. But then other student groups or organizations on campus that are doing other types of anti-racist work. And one of the things that we can do as a writing center is just reach out to those groups who are doing the work and say, how can we support you? Do you have documents we can look over? Do you guys are you going to give a speech? Are you going to do a presentation about this? How can we support you, student organization that is doing the work? Can we come up with an event that coincides with an event that you are having? Can we do anything to support your events? Right.
Um,
So looking at that work.
I think I think also in addition to that, I've noticed, or at least on my campus, that like the kind of activity that that we're describing here often either doesn't get talked about or is fairly small. I was having a discussion with someone at my university a while ago, and it was like back in 2014, two students had started a social justice club at the university, but it was only two people, and like that dissolved because they got busy and had schoolwork and things like that. And so I wonder if sometimes maybe because I know that there are groups on campus, but whether or not they are specifically putting this out to the university officials and such, um, I'm not sure if that like gets put out there for other people to know. So I'm wondering if maybe signaling or maybe even starting like um, workshops about writing a protest or applying for a protest permit or other kinds of
Hmm.
civil activity and like information and resource pooling can be something that we use to signal to various groups like we are a space that not only says we are for these social justice causes, but we also are want to physically get involved with some of this.
Oh, those are great. There are a lot of good discussions happening in the chat too. Does anybody who's talking in the chat want to jump on and discuss some of these ideas? The chat is very exciting right now.
Mm-hmm.
Brittany?
Yeah, I think maybe I can talk out better what I'm trying to write back to Abby. It's yeah,
Mhm.
the whole the white savior complex that we like I think I've seen it too many times, and I get so much secondhand embarrassment. So I just like get cringy when I see this, because this has been a problem at my university that usually a white professor will promote a discussion with saying that they're going to talk about one thing, and then it ends up they go off on a different tangent without addressing the issues of race specifically that's going to be inherent in their discussion, or shutting down the entire discussion, or providing solutions for the race problem. And it's like, well, see, no. And I want to have the discussions and listen, but also not heavily rely on the labor of people of color, predominantly like majority women of color, to be. I feel that it's kind of like forcing them to come up with a solution when it's, and I want to listen and I want to help in any way and give support, and how can I just not force them to fix it? Like that's, and of course, Abby,
Okay,
would you like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I'm gonna call on Abby. I just want to remind everybody it's 10:40. Technically, our session is ending, and another breakout session is gonna start at 10:45. But you can stay here if you want to. If you're really enjoying this, we can stay here and keep doing this. I'm not gonna stop us. But just if you want to go to another session, we'll probably restart it. Oh, so Abby, go for it.
Yeah, I guess what I was, hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, this is all a new format, but yeah, I think speaking to what Brittany was just saying about kind of the victim becoming the educator or being forced to become the educator in a lot of these conversations is a huge issue. And I did a program.
Oh. Hopefully she'll come back in a second.
I hate it when that happens.
That's the worst place to be caught. She did a program, she had information for us, and then it paused. We'll call on her again when she gets back.
But yes, if anybody has any comments or feedback on that, I want to be an advocate for my tutors who are people of color without relying on them or their labors in order to have the discussion. But I also understand that I can't have the discussion because I come from a place of privilege, and I just want to help.
Yeah, so I know part of our duty as privileged white people is, and hopefully Abby will reconnect in a second, is that it is our job that if our consultants or employees or whatnot of color have ideas, it's our job to support them, right? It's our job to jump out there and put ourselves on the line for whatever it is that they want or need to be doing. So whenever they want something, we need to be there for them and make sure that we're being supportive of that. And I know that another part of our job is that when we are in a group with white people, we are supposed to make sure we are defending everybody amongst those other white people. Thank God Abby is back. Abby, go for it.
Okay, I'm not gonna turn on my video because I think possibly it'll make my Wi-Fi slower, but yeah, what I was saying is just kind of the victim being forced to become the educator is very problematic in that I think we have to address our own privilege. Like I am not white, I'm Asian American, but in these conversations, I always kind of assume that like quote unquote white is also talking about me. And I think for a lot of us that goes in, like I know this discussion is around race, but in any sort of privilege, right? Like whether it be not being low income, not being like like whatever it is, we have to address our own privilege in the conversation before we have that conversation. And I think a lot of the times that it doesn't happen, like in these conversations, people just assume that, oh, we can discuss this issue, quote unquote, openly. But in doing that, it's like you're not addressing that inherently in this room, we are all privileged and that we can have this conversation without dealing with the issue most of the time, for a lot of us, depending on the conversation. But we have to address that and then go forward in the conversation with that in mind, so that everyone is well aware of the fact that we are not the people that we are talking about in this conversation in most of the cases, or at least we have the privilege of not directly dealing with these issues right now, which is why we're able to be so comfortable in this room and have that conversation.
Right. All right, we're having a little bit of a turnover now. Some people are leaving, some people are coming in. So if you are just joining us, welcome to the Race and the Writing Center breakout session. We are currently talking about white privilege and how we can do the work without putting undue emotional labor onto people of color. There are also some questions that I put in the chat. I'll put them back in the chat a second time, so if it looks weird, for people who are just joining us as possible topics that we could be discussing. So if anybody wants to jump in with a question or a comment or suggestions, I know in part of what Brittany and Abby have just been talking about, that one of the biggest issues is that white people who are safe sort of in the university system are often silent. We as Abby was saying, we talk about these issues in a safe space, like we are in now. We're talking to other Writing Center people who have the same ideas that we have, and we are trying, we feel like we can have these conversations here. We even feel like we can have these conversations in our writing centers. Because those are places where we feel safe and are comfortable. But the issue comes when, how do we have these conversations with our administrators? How do we have these conversations with the faculty? How do we have these conversations with other groups? So if there are any thoughts on that or other questions. Trila. Is it Trila or Trela?
Hi, it's Trila. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate being here today. I'm actually in a little bit of a different situation. I work at a writing center that is within the Department of Defense. It's a one-year graduate program for military officers. And we have 3 very diverse consultants. We only have 3, a black, a white, and an Asian. And I think, that diversity in hiring was purposeful, and I think it really works at our university. And of course, we're hoping to grow. But we have officers, military officers from about 60 different countries. And then we also have, of course, the American military officers. So basically, I feel like in trying to do this work, I work within a lot of restrictions. So I really appreciate the ideas today, and it's really started me to thinking about how we can make changes to the new faculty orientation that we do every year. So basically, we have about 2 hours to try and educate or inform faculty about some of these issues when we do our new faculty orientation. So I just wanted to make that comment, and if anyone has any suggestions about how we can sort of make the most of that time, that would be great. Thank you.
What do you currently talk about in that orientation? How are these things currently being addressed?
Well, there are 3 of us. The first part of the orientation focuses on, just an introduction to the Writing Center, what we do as consultants, and how we're there for students. My part, and this is where I think a lot of this information can come in, is responding to student writing. And the third part is basically it's more ELL focused. We have an ELL specialist, one of my colleagues, just using technology to help students, and again, trying to educate faculty about how to respond to ELL writers. But so far it hasn't been, really in depth. Our writing center is only 2 years old, so we're still, building. The concept of a writing center within the Department of Defense is still very new, and so we're kind of building it from the ground up, so to speak.
And talk about a system that's been in place that's hard to change. I'm sure
Yes.
that's a huge one. So I mean, let's talk for a minute then about orientations, because I'm sure that we all have, probably how do we orient ourselves to the students? How do we orient ourselves to the faculty? How are we incorporating any awareness or conversations of anti-racism, diversity, multilingualism, things like that, into those initial class visits or initial introductory sessions or tours or other things that we do right at the beginning of semesters to try and sort of set the tone. Anybody have anybody address any of those issues in their initial? I'm trying to think in ours, when we give tours and we give we do class visits, we always try to send out we always try to send undergrads to talk to undergrads, but it usually comes down to who is available at the time rather than a more focused, let's think about making sure we're sending out people who are going to show that we have diversity or representation in our group. Though we do talk about diversity in the center and how everybody is welcome, but it's not really a strong statement. Any thoughts like that or additional questions? It can be something that we stew over. Seems like group 2 is the quiet group. So I'll throw out there, what sort of problems are you seeing in your universities, or questions do you have about how we can better support Black and Indigenous and people of color? Keliani?
Hi, yeah. I feel like that is kind of a difficult question to answer, because I think that it can be sort of a fine line between wanting to offer support, but then also like recruiting or advertising in a way that doesn't come across as feeling really like racially targeted in an uncomfortable way.
Right.
And I think like just sort of thinking about like what are some organizations on campus that we can reach out to and sort of collaborate with through them, so that it's not like targeting specific students, but rather kind of working to collaborate with clubs and organizations that are already on campus and trying to get involvement through that, or that being like maybe a better way to share than going to classes. Like I know at Emory we do like class visits, where we go in. Now it's like over Zoom. We like join the Zoom call for undergraduate and graduate classes and kind of talk about the Writing Center and what it is that we do, just to sort of promote it. And so like, and we are doing like some outreach to clubs, but maybe like offering to do like a similar thing, like a club visit for them too, could be also helpful, because I think that those are sort of the spaces where people kind of tend to like come together, and it's like their actual interest. So if you're going to like a lit mag club and talking about like using the writing center, we might actually get kind of like a different base or population versus like going into a class where it's like talking about perhaps the assignment in the class versus maybe like a more personal project or something that is more near and dear to their heart.
Absolutely. So the idea of reaching out to different clubs and organizations to try to find out what it is they're doing, right? What is your group doing? What are your activities for the semester? How can we help support you? And it allows you to really focus in on, making sure, like, if you want to make sure that your writing center is doing good work, you find the clubs and organizations who are active on campus, and you say, how can we support you? How can we help you? How can we, if you are, one of the people in the last group was talking about how across campus, a lot of campuses have like buildings named after various oppressors, right? And lots of student groups on campus that are working to change the name of things. So how can we support those groups? One of the students in the last group suggested that, can we hold workshops on things like filling out paperwork for having a protest, or having events, that will actually help make some of the work happen, right? So thoughts on that? I see Mandy in the chat is talking about making anti-racism work more visible and more public. So how can we do that to make that work more visible and more public? Yes, Mandy.
Hi, sorry, it's the format's a little awkward.
Yeah.
To continue first in the vein you were just taking us, Brandy, with what are some like actual concrete ways we might participate in and also support as allies, students of color, Indigenous students, Black students, who are working for change, who are working to advance anti-racism, equity, inclusion in big ways. And so I love that idea of, having workshops for like how to fill out permits to do a protest. Also, maybe there's like, there could be like gatherings where people like write letters to elected officials or to university administration even. I've heard a little bit of buzz about other writing centers doing that, but I'd love to hear other people in this group talk more about ideas in that vein, if others have them.
Mm-hmm. Jack?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I guess this is not really an answer, it's more of another related question, or just something that I think it sort of brings up. Something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is our roles in making change as part of the institutions that we're in, and trying to recognize the history and culpability of those institutions, and whether it's really advisable to make change from within institutions, and sort of how to negotiate that whole discussion. And I think that sort of connects to how I think a lot of students also sort of have those debates and may feel a little bit wary of challenging their institutions directly, or and that may also, link into politics and feeling wary about getting really directly involved in political situations. And I don't really have any answers for that, but I just think it's an interesting sort of part of why that question is so difficult.
Any sort of challenging of the institution is scary, right? As directors of writing centers, the people who are faculty, people who have any power in the center, those people should be making direct pleas, should be working with the administration, and should really be putting themselves out there to make that change happen. But it's harder on a student level, on a consultant level, for untenured faculty to do things like that. So figuring out concrete actions like Mandy and Christina in the chat are talking about. So I love this idea of a letter writing campaign. One of the other things that we have tried to do, to varying levels of success, but it's something that we're interested in going forward with, is hosting. Right? We have a space. We know that space. Well, not right now. Obviously, we're remote right now. But in general, the Writing Center has a space. Lots of groups don't have space, or they're struggling to find meeting spaces where they can go in. So beyond just supporting with our ability to help people fill out a protest form or write letters or anything like that, we also attempt to offer up our space to student groups who are doing some of this work, that they have a comfortable place where they can feel safe working on these things, and we'll help them if there's anything communication related that they can be doing also. Not for like club meetings, but for more active sessions like the letter writing campaign that Mandy mentioned. And we've worked on when we've been having a lot of conversations about citizen centers over the past couple of years, and that was one of the topics in SWCA a couple of years ago. Doing outreach with local high schools and groups who might have need. We had put together, for example, a college application workshop that we do with some of the local high schools that don't have a lot of don't have writing centers and don't have a lot of privilege, so that we can help with college entrance essays for those students. So are there other thoughts or other concrete actions or other ways to get around the direct fear of having to make change in the system that you guys can think of? Christina?
Hi, I'm just going to talk without video, but just thinking about this question, it actually kind of goes back to the question earlier that was brought up about wanting to be able to listen to and respond to the concerns of tutors of color while not relying on their unpaid labor or just their sort of requiring them to sort of be public about things that they are concerned about. I wonder if like thinking about that, as well as thinking about this idea of students feeling uncomfortable with a direct critique of their university, if there's a way that the Writing Center could position itself, and I guess I'm specifically talking about Writing Center administrators, to how do I say this, be a spokesperson, like to have private listening sessions and then make the comments public in some way. That, I mean, this is a really complicated thing, right? To like try to acknowledge the fact that this is coming from a particular student population without appropriating their speech or their contributions, right? But like sort of trying to position ourselves as maybe a kind of a spokesperson that's elevating those concerns.
You've reminded me of something that I read. I'm trying to find the answer to. So, Mandy, I'm going to jump in here once I find my answer. It's not an absolute answer. There are no absolute answers. But Mandy, go for it.
Sorry, it just took me a second to turn my mic on. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, to continue speaking to the good question Jack raised about, like, wariness about critiquing institutions, ambivalence, or like anxiety.
About 100% of my time. It's weird.
One of the things that we've done, I think, in the Writing Center, and maybe even more so in work I've been doing with Native American students and faculty and staff supporters on campus to try to get Emory to acknowledge anything about Muskogee people or commit any kind of resources to student support or Indigenous community engagement for many, many years, is to actually position myself and the Writing Center and this Native student and allies group in relation to the stated university's mission statement and commitments, you know, and not in contrast to them. So not saying like I'm, you know, critiquing what my institution stands for or going against it, but saying like, this is what Emory says they value, you know, in terms of equity, inclusion, diversity, and like, this is how what we're doing is supporting that mission of my school, right? So it's partially like rhetorical savvy, which can be a way to also like advocate for resources and all kinds of things. And partially maybe getting at a little bit of that, those questions about anxieties. But yeah, I mean, I guess I try to talk with my tutors a lot about, you know, a way to be a responsible citizen, right, is to be critical, respectfully critical of your institutions, governments, etc., including like how they may be not living up to their own stated values. I think that one of the trickiest things, though, is language, right, which is why that's such a huge part of what you address in your article, Christina, and what lots of scholars who talk about anti-racism work in writing centers address, because I think a lot of the faculty and administrators at our institutions don't see the language thing as, it's not like they don't want to be doing racial justice work or equity work. It's that they don't see the language stuff as part of that. They don't see their, like, you know, dinging their students a letter grade for every grammar error or whatever as part of systemic racism. And so I don't think you're going to change their minds about that overnight, but finding ways to do work on campus and make our work public. And I often talk with my tutors about just like in the little session summaries that we write after every consultation and we send to the writer, and many times we send it to the professor, you know, the way that you talk about the work you're doing with a student, you know, even if it's just sort of one professor at a time, seeing that can be really impactful and can help to shift, you know, administrators and other faculty members' understanding.
And finding ways to help students who really want to use a vernacular or a non-standard English, and helping them do it well and do it to the point, and making sure they have authority over their own work when they don't necessarily feel like they have a choice and they have to do everything in standard American English. I know my consultants, you know, Georgia Tech, I'm sure Emory is similar, but in other schools, but, you know, Georgia Tech students are so focused on success. right? I want to make sure that I'm doing everything right and what my professors care about matters more than anything. And so students who come in are often, you know, if they've written something and they're having language issues, that's obviously the first thing that they are concerned about, is whether they have said something right, because they want to make sure that everything is correct for their professors, which is sad because often what they are saying and what they are saying in a vernacular is a lot more powerful or more interesting or more to the point somehow or another. Abby?
Yeah, again, I'm gonna leave my camera off just because my Wi-Fi, I don't know, keeps going in and out. But to go off of that, I think that an interesting thing to talk about is how to make it more inclusive for students of different backgrounds who maybe come from like different cultures and who maybe are low income. And not only is their writing criticized for that, but also the readings that we do by like the nature of academia and academic writing is that it is sometimes difficult to understand because it's written in this like standardized like SAE. So my question would be, how can we make not only writing more inclusive in how we like quote unquote grade or judge writing, but also how can we make what we read and what is assigned more inclusive to people of different backgrounds. I had this, a friend of mine was reading Enzil Dua, and I had read Enzil Dua before and like absolutely loved her. But they came up to me and like I kind of recommended it to them because I was like, oh, I think you would like this and like maybe identify with it. And then I totally did not get the reaction that I wanted because they were just kind of like, I don't really know what's happening in this writing, which I thought was interesting because like Enzil Dua literally speaks to like these barriers and identify and like writing with poetry and prose, you know, to be more inclusive of different styles and different cultures. But the irony of that is that like to a lot of people who maybe didn't grow up in an environment where they had all the resources to understand this kind of writing, like would read Enzil Dua and not be able to understand her, which I think is just really interesting, and that kind of struck me. And I guess what I've been thinking about is just, yeah, like what we're talking about, how can we make the writing more inclusive and how we judge writing more inclusive, but also like how do we make assignments and reading more accessible to people who didn't come in with the equal resources that a lot of us did.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that? One thing I would say while other people are mulling it about, at Georgia Tech we have the benefit that a bunch of the members of our staff are postdocs who teach English 1101 and 1102. So we have these conversations and they are actually teaching, and so some of these things that we discuss in language and diversity and resources, as Abby was just talking about, they take into their classrooms and they talk about with the other teachers who are teaching English 1101 and 1102. And so that is helpful for getting those things across and hoping that people who are able to teach can take what we're learning and discussing in the writing centers out further. But obviously most schools aren't like that. Some grad students are also teaching English 1101 and 1102. But what I've also found is that the student voices are extremely powerful. And if the students come together and ask for example, more diversity in their reading, more discussions in English 1101 or 1102, or whatever the version of that you have at your university, or in the courses that are in any sort of introductory courses, particularly that most freshmen are going to be taking. Students should just write to the administration, write to the people in charge of those courses, write and try to ask for that sort of diversity in materials as well. And one of the things that you could do as a writing center is work with students on some sort of writing campaign like that, as Mandy mentioned previously. Do you guys have other thoughts about what Abby was saying? Yeah. Diversity requirements are good. Mandy.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, it's a good.
All the switching is very annoying.
Okay, now I see why. Now I see why you guys are just staying on. Not you guys, but you people are staying on audio because you have to check the box every time. Yeah, I mean, maybe one point of intersection here is, you know, I said in the chat, you know, yes to student voices being impactful. You know, like sometimes students have anxiety about critiquing the institutions. Sometimes they have way less anxiety than they're way less timid than faculty and staff. Sometimes they're the ones willing to like literally lay down their bodies in front of administrators, and they need to inspire us, you know, sometimes more conservative or timid faculty and staff to be more bold in our own advocacy work. So yay to that. And to our, you know, Christina Akins talked about this in the first session about the importance of amplifying scholars of color in writing center studies. And so I think, you know, similarly to us wanting to amplify student voices, like not just on our writing center staff, but more broadly on our campuses, another thing I think we can do, and I think you talk about this, Christina, in your article, is, you know, assigning more work by scholars of color and work that's in diverse styles and genres. I think it was Abby who was talking about on SWCA, you know, speaking to some students and not to others, you know, so having a diversity of voices and experiences reflected in what we're assigning our tutors to read and what we're assigning and encouraging colleagues to assign in classes. I think that's a really great point, Abby, in that you're right, that kind of the reading piece of the curriculum is very tied also to these conversations. So thanks for raising that. And it's something that we are working on as a leadership team at Emory, you know, directly with our writing center professional development to be amplifying more, especially voices of color in what we assign. And I will admit that we have a long ways to go yet before our like practicum course syllabus and other materials that we're doing reflect those diverse voices more richly. So thanks.
One of the things that I wanted to say in response to what Christina brought up earlier about listening sessions is there were a couple of books. There was an article, The 7 C's for Effective Teaching, and then the book. It's Christopher Imland's For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood. I don't know if anybody has ever read that. Both of these things talk about cogenerative dialogues, which they define as cogenerative dialogues, or cogens, are structured exchanges in which students and their teachers co-develop strategies for instruction that focus on the student's socio-emotional and academic needs. The dialogues enable open communication concerning both the teachers' and students' perspectives on schooling. They take place outside of traditional classroom lessons, before school, or during lunch. The teacher invites 4 students who are otherwise not connected to one another to join the group. They may be from different racial or ethnic groups or perform at different academic levels. The point is they will have different relationships both to the content being taught and to the teacher. In the classic example of a cogen, a teacher asks 4 students to meet after school. a student who has high exam grades, another who has failed a few exams, a student who's highly verbal, a student who doesn't say anything. The teacher thanks the students for coming, and they sit down, and over the course of several weeks, they have conversations about how to improve the class for all of the different types of students in it. And so I had been thinking about how that format could be adapted in some way to the Writing Center. Is there a way to approach English 1101 or 1102 students, for example, at the very end of their semester and say, send them a questionnaire that says, have you felt traditionally left out of the conversations about communication, about your ability to participate in class, about your writing, about your presentation abilities? Do you feel like you're not being represented here in some way? And find a way to get some responses from students and pull together a group of diverse students that way who can come into the Writing Center and talk about how we can best make sure those voices are getting heard in some way. And then ideally having a conversation with those students over the course of a few weeks, a month, a semester, however long that needs to be. And then maybe ideally getting ideas from those students, and also seeing if we can pull them into the center in and of itself and see, want to contribute back to the center in some way. There are some logistical problems with being able to do that, but it was something that I found valuable in trying to get differing opinions and trying to figure out sort of a system that would work with that. Has anybody else had any sort of different ideas for hearing student voices? Or any other final thoughts? It's 11:22. We have about 8 minutes left until we're supposed to go back for conclusions. Mandy?
Hi, I was just going to say we did a few years ago at Emory, we did focus groups with Black students who used the Writing Center and didn't use the Writing Center to get input about, what they appreciated, what they didn't, what they wanted more of. And one of the tutors who graduated but was working with us this summer, Imani, had the very good idea that we should do that regularly. We should do focus groups with students from various backgrounds on our campus, just as a regular part of listening to and learning from students, and to the point that came up during our plenary session, like, we don't have a ton of money for that kind of stuff, but we at least paid people for their time. I mean, we paid people with food for their time, and also with the promise that we would actually do stuff. I think that's very important, that you're actually going to do something with what you learn, because at least in our case at that time, some of the students we were meeting with were leaders in Black student groups on campus, and were having lots of meetings with university administrators, some of which they felt were having an impact, and some of which they felt like were just so that someone could check something off their box for their diversity work, like, oh, I did this thing. And so being very careful to be honest about why we were having the session, keeping it short to respect people's time, and feeding people, and making a promise that we would actually implement some of the suggestions that we heard from people, I think were all really important. And yeah, but we haven't done anything like that now for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. So I think Amani was right to call me out for that. And I look forward to talking with my own tutors on this call about how we can do that. And I'm curious to hear others from other institutions speak to your question, Brandy, about ways we can listen to students.
Can I ask Mandy about the formatting you used for that and how you advertised? Was it a sort of specific here's some questions, or was it completely open? And how did you send out information about those to others so that you could get people to actually come in for them?
Yeah, of course, it's a lot easier to recruit people who use the Writing Center than people who don't. But our research team included an African American undergraduate student who was involved with the Black Student Union on campus and part of leadership. So she was able to recruit people through her involvement there. And she also had already done like student services, focus group based research for another project. So she had, sort of the networking connections as well as the skills for that type of research. And then we also had a graduate student who was in political science and very good at doing things like designing research, and they work together actually, to take the lead on designing questions that were deliberately open-ended, but also could give us useful information. It's been a while, but yeah, it was good.
It seems like that would be a very useful thing if you can find a way to communicate with these groups. We were lucky this past semester to have a student who was just very heavily into the student government and was able to talk to the student government organization. Oh, Dwayne's got the link for the closing session. You guys have been great. Thank you for the good conversation. If anybody needs to run to the bathroom real quick before we go on to the next session, probably a good idea. Bye, everybody.